My name is Imogen Blood and I am the chair of the Men's Room Board. I guess what makes us a creative organisation is not just that we do arts-related activities, that's obviously really important, but I think it should, and I believe it does, run right through everything we do. So it should be about the way in which we engage people right from the point that we're on the streets with them. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're immediately doing a bit of graffiti with them there and then on the spot. But I think it does mean that we are trying to sort of tap into people's strengths and identify ways of them expressing their real selves, rather than us trying to look for problems and to think about how services can be sort of matched to some of those problems. It brings a kind of different ethos to every point of connection with us as an organisation. And that straight away I think we're trying to think about how we can engage that person in some kind of artistic activity or self-expression, rather than immediately thinking how can we slot this person into a housing project or into a particular kind of surgery around sexual health. Obviously we're doing that stuff as well, but I think there's something there about spotting that artistic opportunity. It's about giving people a chance to, and the space to experiment and to play and to have fun. I think that's really important, especially with the group of young men that we work with who have had often no opportunities to do that. So I think having the opportunity to do all of those things, and through those things to find a voice through a range of different media, and through finding a voice to hopefully get a clearer sense of what their own personal goals are, and that feeds it back through to the sort of social care angle, really. You know, it's about helping people through quite a different path to really identify who they are and what they want to do and how they're going to get there. Well, I've always been quite interested by the whole idea of wearing masks. I think, you know, I started out doing prison drugs work in Buckley Hall and working on a partnership with Kate from TIP at the time, and one of the kind of metaphors that we built through some of that drama work was the idea of wearing a mask all the time. I mean, we all wear masks for a range of different reasons, but I think particularly for young men who are on the streets and who've had to sort of learn to survive, you know, having to wear a mask and having to wear a range of different masks, I think is a really kind of key means of survival and self-expression. And I think giving people an opportunity to kind of, not to peel the mask off, because that's kind of, you know, can be quite sort of really uncomfortable for people, if not borderline abusive in a way, but giving them the opportunity to experiment and to realise actually that they are wearing masks and that there is a real person underneath and that they can express who they are and can create that identity for themselves through a range of different things, whether it's, you know, making some music, whether it's doing some poetry, whether it's having the chance to kind of play around with different roles in a kind of forum theatre type of way. And I think that's really, you know, such a valuable sort of tool within, I mean, I come from a social care background, but I think from a social care perspective, that's such a sort of valuable tool within your kind of repertoire of working with people to be able to give them the space to do that. I think one of the things on a very practical level which we try to maintain, but which can be challenging, is that we try to keep a much more kind of flexible approach with people. I know that, and I know this goes against the ethos of other organisations in the city, but I know that more of them are having to be much stricter about, you know, people not attending appointments and then being kind of struck off effectively, you know, and around their sort of eligibility criteria, just because there's so little money to go around, you know, things have to be rationed much more. And I think we work more kind of holistically and flexibly and realistically with people, and I don't think that's because the workers in those other agencies don't see the good in that. I just think we're a little bit less tied by some of those bureaucratic rules. So I think, you know, we're able to work in a, you know, we can take the time to work with people in the way that they need to be worked with at that point of time, which I think is really important. So I think being able to offer people that kind of whole menu of, you know, one-to-ones, which could cover a whole range of things, and running alongside kind of group creative opportunities, I think, and I know from my own personal experience of providing that within the prison, can be really powerful for people, because sometimes people don't want to talk in that intensive one-to-one kind of way about their problems and but they can happily get a lot out of being in a kind of much more creative group setting. And at other times life just feels so crisis laden that actually the thought of trying to engage in any kind of artistic situation is just too much, so you've got the opportunity of the one-to-ones. And I know people move between the two. I think the sort of strength-based stuff that I spoke about earlier is really important, and I think having that kind of flexibility to work in quite a sustained, not necessarily time-limited way, though all of that raises challenges, because it just looks as though for the amount of men we're working with, we're not, it's quite an expensive intervention, not compared to social services, but compared to what you might think it should be. So there are tensions and challenges around doing that, and articulating the rationale and the benefits for doing it, I think. Given that our workers aren't earning vast salaries, and we're not using really expensive buildings or anything, it's all done on a pretty tight shoestring really, but it kind of, just because of sometimes the varying numbers of people you get and the kind of intensity of the one-to-one stuff that we quite often pick up, we work in a very sort of personalised, tailored, holistic way with a small number of people who would be perceived as extremely difficult by lots of other agencies, and that's our SP, and that's why we don't try to work with hundreds of people. We don't try to do a million different things to lots of different people. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
I think thinking about our whole journey, I think like a lot of organisations of this kind, we started off with a very sort of charismatic person, a couple of charismatic people who felt very strongly about this mission and set the project up from scratch, and threw enormous amounts of kind of personal reserves and determination and creativity into doing that, and I suppose we've grown, and obviously both of those two original founder members have left, so there's been a lot of kind of change really, and I guess from my position as chair, this felt like an enormous balancing act to ensure that we can create a proper sustainable organisation that actually has enough credibility to receive funding and to be strategically partnered by other organisations without quashing that kind of spark of on the streets, kind of creative, in touch with people, working in a really flexible way with people in a really different way, and not being too crushed by all the sort of organisational stuff that we've had to put in place to survive and to begin to feel like a credible organisation, I think. So I think that's, from where I sit as chair, that's been one of the real challenges. And obviously within all of that, the funding kind of position has come and gone, and at one point it very, 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 very much went, and it's been gradually worked back up again. So I suppose I'm very conscious of that, and where the bottom line is all the time in everything we do, really. We get pretty much all our funding, bar tiny amounts of bits and pieces from elsewhere, but we get pretty much all of it from charitable trusts, for which obviously we have to apply, and there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in that. There's a lot of waiting for things to go through the first phase, and then having to apply for the second phase, and we can't apply this year because we applied last year, and every now and again we do strike lucky and get some significant chunks. I mean, the men's room really kind of launched itself when it got a 3-year chunk of money from Comic Relief. I can't remember the exact amounts of money now, but that was enough to kind of really get us off the ground properly. I guess one of the really big challenges is, of course, that those kinds of funders want to fund innovative projects, and we can obviously come up with innovative projects till the cows come home, but what they don't necessarily want to fund is your kind of core infrastructure. And so I think if you're not careful, you end up sort of piecing together umpteen new projects, and you don't, in the middle of it, your core, which obviously has to grow to support all of those projects organisationally, gets weaker and weaker, and that's where real risks come in. And I think we made some brave, we learnt the hard way, I should say, in the early days, that actually there wasn't enough core funding being put into each of those new project bids, and because there was a lot of excitement about rushing off, chasing this new thing, setting off this new initiative, we ended up stretched in lots of directions with nothing left, literally not a big hole in the middle really. So I think kind of finding ways to really sort of fund the infrastructure and the core and the salaried posts. Nobody really wants to just give you funding for your project manager or your offices. They want to fund you to go off and do some street-based artwork with people in Levenshulme. It's balancing all of those is a real tension, I think. I think they like the fact that we're pretty much unique in that we're the only organisation really specialising in working with men who sell sex or are at risk of selling sex, and that makes us very unusual and quite unique, and I think funders pick up on that and want to support us as a result of that. I think in some ways that's easier to sort of sell, sounds awful, but easier to kind of push as a reason for funding us than our combination of arts and social care, which is sometimes quite difficult to articulate, I think. I mean, we have succeeded in getting some funding from the Arts Council, of course, which felt like a real kind of milestone. And I think some, you know, our other funders certainly like the fact that we offer a creative approach, but it's sometimes difficult to kind of, I think, to kind of articulate that marriage really and what it does, and to really kind of give credible outcomes to it. Kind of the client group that we work with, and multiple disadvantage is another kind of pushes a lot of buttons, I think, with a lot of trusts. A lot of people, you know, really like the fact that we're working with people who've slipped outside of mainstream services and have built up sort of layers of multiple problems and slightly defy categorisation. I think that's quite popular. I mean, it has to be said, I think some of the kind of pressure around, some of the sort of the kind of pressures around outcomes, although I would resist quite a lot of that, I do sort of, part of me thinks, oh, it is really difficult with the sort of measurements that everybody wants, and the people's definitions of what success are often just don't seem to fit very well with our client group. And I think we can work in ways that are successful, that just don't even start to hit the Richter scale of, you know, getting people into employment and, you know, stable housing. But I do think all of that kind of agenda does keep us on our toes, and we need to be kept on our toes, because I think it's easy to create, it's never going to be cosy, the men's room, but some kind of a cosy club of people, and that, you know, inevitably then build their own roles in the organisation. This is the young men who, and it, you know, where are they going? What's happening with us? Do we just kind of hang on to them for the rest of their lives? Is this, we create this kind of safe space in which people can express themselves and experiment with different types of arts? Where's it all going really, and what's the kind of progression? And are we trying to challenge these young men into some kind of more formal educational setting? Is that possible? Have we just, you know, what's the right level of aspiration that we should have and that they should have, and what are the pathways out of and through the men's room, and how can we create ones that are meaningful? So I think all of that agenda keeps us having those discussions. It's really hard, isn't it? Because by definition, those pathways have got to be incredibly individual, haven't they? I don't think we can kind of say, right, you're on year 2 of the men's room, you know, now you need to be like not doing any sex work, and preferably living in a slightly more settled accommodation than you were before, and perhaps you might even be starting to show a little bit of interest in applying for a course. You know, we can't kind of create that in a sense, can we? But I think we've had a lot of, I mean, yes, all we can do at a social care level, I guess, is, you know, provide people with enough kind of challenge through the sort of one-to-one and support to try to sort of move along whatever route it is they want to get. But I think we've had a lot of discussion from an artistic point of view about how realistic it is, how we can, I think, challenge some of our core members more to be taking on more of a role of facilitating activities and sessions themselves, and to build some of those kinds of skills, and to provide a bit more of a kind of pathway sort of for artistic progression in the city for young men that want to take that route and are talented enough to do that. I was really looking at a project not so long ago, which I think was supporting learning artists with a learning disability. I can't remember the name of it now, down in London somewhere. And that was kind of created artists in residence who were kind of having a supported period in which they had, you know, there was a poet who was, you know, had been supported to have some performances, and a visual artist who'd, you know, got a little slot in a gallery or something. And I do kind of think, you know, where young men want to pursue a particular art form, it's probably not realistic they're going to audition and get jobs at the Royal Exchange, but we could start to think about whether, you know, there are ways of giving those men some kind of a space, or an opportunity to exhibit their work, or to sell their work, or to go to sort of step to that next level a bit. I mean, it's really telling, I guess, that I'm not suggesting that the young men aren't, or some of the young men aren't at certain times really committed to the artistic process, but it's the fact that we give out Greg's pasties at our sessions once a week that really gets them through the door. And, you know, you could of course look at that from a cynical point of view, that they're only coming for the food, but then you think that actually people are genuinely really hungry. You know, it's at that level of emotion, of survival, really, isn't it? So it's kind of quite sobering, I think, and it's really important that we do that, because actually you can't, you know, do forum theatre on an empty stomach, can you? So I think there are basic needs there that need to get met and don't always get met. And I think, you know, just the whole kind of, the whole sort of position that people's benefits at the moment is just desperate. I mean, it really is. And I know we've had lots of our young men who've been sanctioned for various reasons, you know, and it's like they've got no income at all for, you know, sometimes months, which clearly is completely, I mean, we can sit here all we like talking about pathways away from crime, but clearly if you've got to eat, you've got to eat, haven't you? So it's, I think there are some of those kind of both sort of what I hope is short-term political stuff, and some of the kind of huge structural inequalities just kind of, run through everything we do, and there are no easy answers to that, I guess. But, in the short term, at least giving people a pasty, and in the longer term, giving people a voice and some sense of, their self-worth in terms of progression to a better economic place, and at a broader level, some kind of voice collectively, some kind of voice perhaps politically, because I think, one of the things the men's room does really well is that we bring together young men who are very fragmented often and kind of half know each other in their passing through, like ships through the night kind of way, but we create a kind of much more positive collective place for them to be in. And I'm not suggesting that that's overtly political, or at this stage that it's overtly political, but I think at least we facilitate people to come together and make of that what they will. Economic precariousness of the organisation, yes, I think, it's been interesting as new board members from, our kind of calibre of board members, we're attracting some quite sort of high up people these days, and I think it's been quite telling as people have joined the organisation and felt a little bit hairy about the bottom line, and we've thought, God, we've been a lot worse than this, but yeah, if you're just not used to that degree of precariousness, then it can feel really precarious, and we're more secure now than we've been. We've been through times where we really have barely been able to afford to pay people, and we've had massive deficits that have kept all of us awake at night, really. So we're being able to fund something for the next few months quite comfortably, and thinking that we'll probably be alright for at least another 6 months, is about as good as it's ever going to get, really. And I think I don't know whether that, I suppose you could look on the bright side and say it does keep us on our toes, and it's good not to be complacent, and I think it's good to kind of keep a little bit of a sort of rough and ready, making it up as we go along, kind of, not getting too settled in some kind of nice flash building with long-term permanent contracts, and sort of turning into too much of a kind of settled organisation that takes itself a bit for granted is perhaps brings some kind of unique energy to us. But obviously it would be really nice if we did have a little bit more stability and weren't kind of stressing out about how we're going to pay our staff, who obviously work ridiculously hard and don't have the kind of stability of work that would be nice to give them. I think one of the things that is really important about what we do is that we give people experiences that they have never had before, and would probably never have if it wasn't for us. We've had taken groups of young men to the theatre who have never had that kind of experience before. We know just how unequal access to, to seeing the arts, to being involved in the arts is. There's a huge kind of socio-economic dimension to that, and this is one of probably the most kind of economically marginalised group of people out there. And, to some extent it might seem a little bit kind of bread and circuses to be taking them to the theatre when they've got no money to live on for months, but actually really important that we start to tackle that. So it's not just about meeting absolute basic needs, but it's about giving people a sense of hope, I think, and a sense of identity, and a sense that there's something politically that's bigger out there than just, my day-to-day survival. I've just been doing this piece of work for the Arts Council England, looking at sort of equality and diversity and access to the arts by children and young people, which has been quite interesting. Obviously it's a slightly younger age group than the men's room, but this is the next cohort down, effectively. And I guess it just raises all these questions about what we fund and what we class as art, and who gets to decide that. And actually I think an organisation like the men's room is in a really good position to kind of start to redefine some of that, in a sense. It's like, is the problem that nobody from a working class background goes to see opera anymore, and very few people under about 60 do, or is the fact that we need to find a new opera? And actually I kind of think that the men's room and the group of young men that are there, and other organisations like it, have a real opportunity to kind of create and to help young men, the young people participating in our organisations, to really kind of decide what the new opera is going to be.